Thank you so much for being with us this morning, this Tuesday morning. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Karen Levin. I'm the Executive Director of the Baltimore Zionist District. We're thrilled to have you here with us this morning live from the Weizmann's house, from the Weizmann house, not me, but I am live from Baltimore. But I'm thrilled to introduce you to Joel Rabinowitz, originally from New York City, who has immigrated to Israel back in 1973, where he had worked in Bank HaPoalim. He headed the International Public Relations Department. In his last position before retirement, he was appointed the manager of the bank's representative's office in Australia, where he resided for 4 years. In the 1980s, he was sent to South Africa as a shaliach, an emissary for the Jewish Agency, helping and encouraging those who wish to immigrate to Israel. Joel is an international speaker and has lectured on different aspects of Israeli economy and the banking system throughout Europe, the Far East, and North America. He served as a paramedic in the Israeli Navy, specializing in decompression chambers for deep sea living, diving, and accidents. After his retirement, Joel began as a volunteer at the Weizmann Institute as a tour guide at Yad Weizmann and Weizmann campus. Joel also guides at the ANU, in the new Museum of Jewish People situated in Tel Aviv University campus. He's married with both children and grandchildren. Joel, thank you so much for being with us today to guide us through the Weizmann house. We are just absolutely thrilled. We meant to bring everyone here with their cameras turned off. If you could please turn off your cameras, that will really help us with the bandwidth so that everybody can see better. If you don't turn off your cameras, I'm going to turn them off for you. So please make it easier for me so that I don't have to go through almost 300 people and turn your cameras off for you. So please, please, please just turn off your cameras. Joel, I'm turning it over to you. Please go ahead and start. I think you're muted, so please unmute yourself and I will spotlight you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, first of all, I have to apologize. I can't see any of you. I just have the person who's taking my picture. So I really can't react. I mean, it's a one-sided thing. But I'll start anyway. My name is Joel. As you heard, I'm originally from the United States. I'm not a new immigrant. I've been in the country for over 50 years. And as you can tell, I have a very subdued New York accent. I do not say water, chocolate, or coffee, or dog, all right? Other than that, I'm originally from New York. What I'm going to do now is the next hour, I'm going to give you a tour of some of the rooms in the Weizmann house, Chaim and Vera Weizmann's house. This house was originally built in 1937. Chaim and Vera decided that they wanted to live in Israel. But even before I say that, I should say a few words about Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann was not only the first president of the state of Israel and a leader of the Jewish people internationally, he was also a brilliant scientist, an outstanding entrepreneur. He was probably the wealthiest man in this country when the state was established. But more important, even more than anything else, he was a visionary, and a very unique visionary, in that he was one of the few people who actually had a vision and lived to see the fruits of his labor. He believed that the Jewish people should have their own homeland once again in the land of Israel. And he believed the Jewish people didn't have to live hoping to have a patron or a leader, a king, a president, a prime minister who would be behind the Jewish people and protect them, but that the Jews themselves should have their own country and their own army. Now, where we are now, where I'm standing right now, is in the dining room. This house was built in 1937. Up until then, Chaim and Vera had lived in the United Kingdom, they lived in Manchester, and they lived in London, and they were constantly traveling back and forth. And Chaim Weizmann eventually said, "Come, we must have a home in Israel." And the question arises, why would they build their home here in the city of Rehovot and not in Jerusalem, the heart and soul of the Jewish people? Or why didn't he build in Tel Aviv, the first new city built by Jewish people in 2,000 years? Why did he pick Rehovot? And the answer is really quite simple. In 1910, on the place where I'm standing now, in this area here, There was the first agricultural experimental station established, because the country was, up until the 20th century, the late 20th century, this country was agricultural, meaning here in Rehovot, they grew grapefruits and oranges. And here we had the agricultural center, and they tried to find different types of subtropical fruits and vegetables to acclimatize it to Israel, so the farmers would have something to produce, to sell to the Israelis, and to sell eventually for export. So they had that center here. In the 1930s, when Chaim decided that he wanted to establish a scientific institution here, he went back to the United Kingdom and he met with Lord Seif and his wife Rebecca, and he convinced them to finance, which they did was, they spent quite a bit of money, and they established the Daniel Seif Institute of Science. Later on, when he wanted to expand it, not just to have science, but to have robotics, mathematics, and so on, money was again raised, and they established the Weizmann Institute, which absorbed within it the Daniel Seif Institute, and we have the Weizmann Institute as we have it today. But at any rate, what happened was when they decided to buy land and to live in Israel, they bought 40 dunam of land on a hill where I'm standing right now, and they built this home. They brought over an architect who was renowned in Germany, but not known in the Western world. His name was Erich Mendelsohn. And he asked him, please build for me a small home. Why small? Because everybody was agricultural. There were farms that had maybe 2 rooms, 1 room, an outhouse, and he didn't want it to be presumptuous. But Erich said, when I take all the parameters into consideration when I design a home, one of the most essential ones is, who is the individual who's going to live there? You meet with kings, prime ministers, and presidents. You are the leader of the Jewish people. You must have a house that's commensurate with who you are. As a result, he built this big home. It's really quite large on any standard. And the Israelis, being not what you'd say cynical, when they first saw this house, they gave it a name. They called it the White Palace. So if somebody would come in a horse and a buggy and would travel down the road and say, where does Speaker live? They would say, well, you see the White Palace, turn 2 kilometers to the right. You want to meet with Ruti, turn to the left, and so on. So the first name this house had was the White Palace. When he became president, and it became the presidential residence, received a new name, became the White House. But the house also had another name. This house was state-of-the-art. It's the first greenhouse in the land of Israel. The walls have cork in it for insulation. They have double glazed windows, but since they didn't have the technology we have today, he built thick walls, and on each side, he put a window. This was basically to make it sure that it wouldn't be too hot in summer or too cold in winter. So this house was the first greenhouse. If you were to see this house, and God willing, when you do come here after the corona, or when you can come to visit Israel, if you see the house from the outside, it actually looks like a ship. The tower looks like the bridge, and the windows look like portals, because the architect said that Chaim Weizmann believed that all Jews should come back to Israel, and they didn't come on Dreamliners. They didn't come on jumbo jets. They came by boat. So therefore, the house looked like a boat from the outside. And another name the house received was Noah's Ark, because they came 2 by 2. Now, here we are in the dining room. Everything that you see in this house is the original, except for the curtains, which deteriorated. But from a small piece of material, we were able to replicate all the curtains in the house as you see them here today. How did we know where to put the dishes and everything else that's here? Family albums. We looked at the albums, and therefore we're able to give it the authenticity that is expected of a governmental institution or museum. Now here, this house was built as a private residence, but it became the presidential residence until he passed away. Then it went back to the hands of his wife, Vera, who lived here until she passed away. And in the will, it was then given over to the state of Israel. And in 1978, it became a museum, and it reopened to the public. This is the dining room. Here is where he would receive his guests, his official guests from all over the world. Here is where he would receive the ambassadors who would present their credentials to the president. Now here, who was here to serve the people, to serve them when he had the guests? In the dining room, these doors would close. Over here is the kitchen. And what they did was they hired many of the farmers and their wives to come work in the house when it was necessary. Now, at that time, the country was kibbutzim and moshavim, and it was more socialist. And people said this is outrageous that we actually abused these farmers and so on. But actually, for them, it was a godsend. Because if they ended up sleeping here during the evenings, they then had a treat. When they woke up in the morning, they could take hot showers. And because who had showers, if they had showers at all, in their homes? Now, this is the dining room. Let's go now into the library. Now, although this house is from 1937, I could actually live here today. If I didn't have to clean the windows, there would be no problem. Just in the tower alone, there are over 140 windows. Now, here you see behind me is the library. It's not the only one he had, but here in this house, this library has 1,200 books in it. And it's divided among the two loves of his life, not the two women, the two great loves of his life. Here you have science, and on this side you have Judaism, Zionism, and Jewish philosophy. And they are in 6 languages, which Chaim Weizmann read, wrote, and spoke as if they were his mother tongue. He was what you would call the first pre-state foreign minister of the state of Israel. Why? Because when he met the presidents, prime ministers, and kings, when he fought the fight, trying to convince them that Israel should be back in the Holy Land where the Jews could have their own army, he didn't need interpreters. He was able to speak with them in their own language, not wasting time and being more influential. Now, this, as I said, he had spoke 6 different languages, but this is also, I guess you could call it the first pre-internet library. Because in those days, they didn't have an internet. But as you can see here, Chaim Weizmann sat at this desk, and Vera sat over here to my right at this desk. Here, they would write letters. As again, he was not only the first president, he was not just the leader of the Jewish people, but he was also a scientist. He received fortunes of letters being written to him. And although he didn't have the computer at the time, he did answer, he responded to all those letters. Down the hill from the house, we actually have the Weizmann archives with over 10,000 letters that he had written together with Vera. Now, Vera, as the first lady, received numerous letters requesting help from the Israelis and the people at that time. Because if you know Israeli history, for the first 10 years or so, we lived in a period of austerity, Sena, and people needed so much, and they constantly requested. Now, if she could help, she did so. But if she couldn't, she at least wrote them back. And as a result, we have letters from both of them, almost 10,000 in number. Now, I mentioned the 2 great loves of his life, the 2 great women in his life. One of them is his mother, Rachel. Now, Rachel, they lived in a little village called Motul in the Pale of Settlement in Russia. It was a little village. Her father was a timber merchant. Doesn't mean that he cut trees. He actually had a major factory. They were quite wealthy. I'll show you a picture in another room. You can see they were upper middle class. And they had 15 children. Of the 15 children, 12 lived to adulthood, and they were all highly educated. Because Chaim's mother and father, Rachel and Ozer, were strong followers of the Haskalah movement, or the education movement. Now, Jews historically have always been literate, because it says in the Bible that with an outstretched arm, I took you out of the land of Egypt to bring you to the land of fruit and plenty. And if you can't read or write, how can you teach? So Jews always had rabbis who, not as spiritual leaders, but as teachers, would take all the boys and girls, if requested, from the ages of 4 or 5, and they would learn the alphabet and they'd learn to read and write. Among the non-Jews who could read or write, only the clergy and the aristocracy, because knowledge was power. However, when it became in the 19th century, the age of enlightenment, the doors opened up and anyone who wanted to could go to university. The only ones who didn't go were the Jews, because the Jews were afraid. They were afraid of anti-Semitism. They were afraid of racism. They were afraid of being killed. And this movement, this Haskalah movement, which again, as I said, was encouraged by his parents. They said, Jews, take advantage of this golden opportunity. We have no idea how long this window of opportunity will be open. Take advantage of it. And his mother was a very strong proponent. And what she did was, when she sent Chaim in the beginning to a cheder to learn, she saw he was a brilliant student. So she took him out and sent him to a public school to learn. Later on, when he wanted to go to university, he was not accepted because they had a quota system in Russia, and he ended up learning in Germany. When he finished his PhD, he went onwards to Switzerland, which I'll go into, but his siblings, all of them, male and female, all highly educated. We'll talk about that in the next room. In addition, over here is the second love of his life, as you see here, that's Vera. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see in her hair, or in the hat, it looks like a little bird. Vera had 2 children. If we look at the desk over here, we'll see him. Vera had 2 children. She had Michael and Benjamin. And as you can see, they're actually in the armed forces. When Vera and Chaim decided to live in Israel, their children were grown adults, and they didn't want to make Aliyah. They didn't want to live in Israel, and they stayed there. And then during World War II, either they joined the army, or either they enlisted or called in, drafted. And you have Michael, the youngest one. As you can see, he was in the RAF, the Royal Air Force, and their other son, Benjamin. Now, their son, Michael, he actually was shot down over Basque country in Germany, and his body was never found. But Chaim and Vera never gave up hope. They believed that someday he would come back. Maybe he had amnesia. And the little bird that I showed you in her hat, that little bird was actually the wings that he had as a pilot. Of course, Chaim and Vera never lived to see him. He never did come back. But in their will, it said as follows. It said that the house and everything in it and the land goes to the state of Israel. And Michael, if you are alive, we never gave up hope. You are entitled to A, B, and C. Of course, he never came back. Now, this is their grandson, David. This is Benjamin's son. This cute little boy today is about 85 years old, and he's retired from the BBC. This side of the family was not very active in Israel, but the rest of the family, which I'll show you in the next room, you will see that they are the aristocracy or the elite of education in this country. Now, over here on Vera's desk, we also have some family photos. Here is, I hope you can recognize him. This is Abba Evan, that's President Truman, and that's Vera. And I remember during the Six-Day War, when I was in the States, I heard Abba Evan speaking, and I loved his accent. And I said, I must make Aliyah so that I could sound like him. As you can tell, it didn't really work very well. But here we have that picture, and recognize this guy here? I hope you do, right? Albert Einstein. Now, Chaim, he was a very close friend of Chaim Weizmann, and when Chaim was elected to be president of the World Zionist Organization, he asked his friend to join him to go to the United States and raise money. And they went over to the United States, and with the money they raised, they laid the cornerstone to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Because Chaim Weizmann believed that knowledge and education were the 2 major parameters for the success of a nation. A nation cannot be independent unless it has an economy. And it can't have an economy if it doesn't have industry. And how is it going to have industry if it doesn't have universities? And if you don't have universities, you don't have science. So he truly believed with the money that he raised, he must do something, and he therefore laid the cornerstone of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. This is something that he learned from his mother, who believed that the 2 most important parameters for the success of the individual was knowledge and education. So we never know what we inculcate within our children, but here is the result, all right? Now over here we have some pictures of the family pictures that were very important to him. Here we have Lord Balfour, right? He was what you call today a professional politician. He was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He was Foreign Minister. You name the position, he held it. And we all heard of the Balfour Declaration. Well, there's a story that Chaim used to love to tell. In 1906, 1907, when they first met, Lord Balfour said to him, why do you want to have Palestine to be the home of the Jewish people? It's poor, there's no water, there's disease, there's pestilence, there's Arabs, there's uprisings. let me give you Uganda. I'm sure you must have heard about that, but it's the proposition that the British said we'll give Uganda to, because the sun never sets on the British Empire. They said, we'll give you Uganda, you could live there. And Chaim loved to tell the story. He said, well, let me tell you this. He said, if I were to tell you that I'll give you Paris instead of London to be the capital of the British Empire, what would you say? And Lord Balfour was horrified. He said, no, but London is the heart and soul of the British Empire. So Chaim said to him that 2,000 years ago, when London was a marshland, Jerusalem became and remained the heart and soul of the Jewish people. And according to the story, at their next meeting, Lord Balfour said to him, you know what, you convinced me, I'm a Zionist. Now, this is a picture of Lloyd George, who was prime minister during World War I in the United Kingdom. And you recognize this guy here? This is Churchill, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, who was prime minister during World War II. In World War I, he was Lord of the Admiralty. And he heard that Chaim Weizmann had a patent for making acetone, right? And he said, and acetone is a very important increment in armament. If you make a missile and you shoot it, there's no trail of smoke behind it. So he wanted to have this patent so he can make the missiles to shoot from battleships and not be traced back. Of course, today in the 21st century, it's irrelevant. But at the time, it was very important. The bottom line is that Chaim agreed, and they gave the United Kingdom his patent. All right, he gave him his patent. Now, many people say that this was tit for tat. We got the Balfour Declaration, which says that His Majesty government sees favorably giving the Jewish people Palestine as the national homeland of the Jewish people. But the truth is now, when we really go through history and we go through all the papers that we have found, we know that the British didn't do it because of the acetone patent. They had their own agenda. They had their own reasons for it. It didn't hurt that we got it, but it was not that they got the patent. That's not the reason we had the declaration. After World War I, he received back the patent, and we have figures to show that just from this one patent alone, and Chaim was a brilliant scientist, there are over 220 patents to his name. But from this patent alone, he made over $21 million. And we're not talking about $21 million in 2021. We're talking about $21 million from 1918, 1920, and so on. He was an exceptionally wealthy man. And because he was wealthy, he was able to fund all the things that he wanted to do to fulfill his vision of the Jewish people without problem. This was unlike Herzl, whom, as you know, he actually used up his wife's dowry. And when he passed away, she died totally penniless. Over here, we have a picture, and I'm only putting this on because it's a curios. You must all recognize her. Do you see this picture here of this woman? This is Queen Elizabeth. And no, it's not Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom. It's Queen Elizabeth of Belgium. She was a good friend of the family. And how do you know that she was a queen? Because when she came to visit, you don't bring a bottle of wine, you don't bring chocolate, you bring a picture of yourself. So this is one way that we know that she was the queen. I actually Googled her and I found out something interesting. In her capacity as Queen of Belgium during World War II, she saved hundreds of families from the Nazis. And in fact, among the righteous, among the nations in Yad Vashem, if you look to one of the tallest trees, you will see her, because she was one of the first people to actually be given the honor of being called righteous among the nations. I want to show you one more thing in this room, which I think is really very special. Do you see this collage? Yigal Yadin, who was the second commander-in-chief of the Israeli Armed Forces, wanted to create a special gift for Chaim Weizmann when he turned 75. And what he did was he took epaulets from all the different units that existed in Israel when he was 75 years old, and he made him this collage. This might not be so impressive, but think about it. A man who truly believed as a visionary that the Jews should have their own army to protect their own people sees the fruits of his labor. I thought this is really quite impressive. It was a very special gift that he received. What we're going to do now is go into another room where I'm going to introduce you to his family. Okay, this way. This room is now a small gallery. You can probably hear an echo in this room when I speak, because this room was actually behind me, behind the screen, there are actually two things. Because when people came to visit the president, whether he be as a private individual or the president, they needed to wash up from all the dust. But we have turned this now into a small presentation. And if we look over here, on this wall here, we have a picture of his parents, Rachel and Oizer Weizmann, and his 12 siblings who lived to adulthood. Now remember what I said, the parents were strong believers in education. We're talking 150 years ago. If we look here, his sister Anna, she immigrated in 1933. She has a PhD in chemistry. And when Chaim Weizmann passed away, she took over his laboratory at the Weizmann Institute of Science. If we look at Masha, she was a pediatrician. She lived in the USSR. She was arrested during Stalin's doctor's trial, immigrated to Israel in '56, and she practiced medicine in Rehovot. Mina immigrated in 1913. She was a pediatrician at Hadassah Hospital. Fruma immigrated in 1913. She was a dentist in Jerusalem. Think about it. 140 years ago, what women went to university? And if they already went to university, who became doctors? Now, here's another person that's quite interesting. This is his brother Yechiel, and Yechiel had a son. You might have heard of him. His name was Ezer Weizmann, and he became the 7th president of the state of Israel. Now, something about Vera, Dr. Vera Weizmann. I remember when I lived in South Africa, there was Dr. Cyril Harris, Rabbi Cyril Harris, became the new chief rabbi of South Africa. And he came with his wife, who was an advocate, a lawyer. And I remember in the Jewish press, they wanted to write something interesting about them. They said, here is Rabbi Dr. Cyril Harris, and he did A, B, C, D, and so on. He's brilliant, he was outstanding. He was a rabbi in St. George Wynn in the United Kingdom. And then they said, and then there is his wife, Vera, Dr. Vera Weizmann, who is got confused. Mrs. Harris, who is also a lawyer in her own right, wearing a blue dress with matching tops, matching shoes. And I was livid about it. Here I want to point out, Vera was not just a wife of, she was a very special woman. Vera Weizmann, when she came to Israel in 1918 for the first time, she was horrified at the low level of nutrition and of hygiene that was in this country. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was a kid, I used to see all those pictures of all the kibbutznikim and the beautiful girls with the short shorts dancing the hora, carrying the pitchfork, and it was so romantic and so on. But these young people, when they came and immigrated to Israel, their families stayed behind in Europe. And when they married and reared children, they didn't know how to do it right because there was no one to teach them. So what Vera did, when she went back to the United Kingdom, she met up with a number of her friends, and together they created an organization which you might have heard of, WISO, Women's International Zionist Organization. And with the monies they raised, they sent nurses to Israel to teach the women here how to rear children, hygiene, and nutrition. Now, when they moved to the United Kingdom, they met in Switzerland, but then they moved to the United Kingdom, and they actually resided in Manchester, which was the hub of the Industrial Revolution. Now, when they moved there, they didn't have unions. People were very poor and there weren't unions. What she did is she set up a series of clinics, which in Israel we call tipat halav, or drop of milk. And any child that is born for the first year of his life was actually receiving medical care. They would weigh the child, check his hearing and sight and so on for the first year. This is something that she did. I think it's quite impressive, especially at that time. Now, when she became wife of the first president, she was also an honorary president of the Magen David Adom. And in that capacity, what did she do? She took all the hospitals that existed in Israel and she set up rehabilitation centers for wounded soldiers. Now, in Israel in the 1950s, they also had the polio epidemic, but the country was going through austerity. There were no rehabilitation centers for the children. Now, when they built this house in 1937, they have something which did not really exist in Israel at that time. They have a swimming pool. They have a swimming pool and 40 dunum of land, about 12 acres. What did she do? She together with, I think it was called King, which is an organization that deals with children who have problems, medical, whatever. And together they opened up the pool, and they used this as a rehabilitation center for the children who suffered from polio, and it worked for about 10 years. Right, this is Vera. Vera she was not a feminist, but she was a very strong, dynamic woman. And she believed that it was the obligation of every woman to maximize her potential and utilize it. And just as she expected it from herself, she expected it from all those who worked for her as well. Maximize your potential. Again, she was not a feminist, she wasn't a suffragette, but she did believe that a woman must maximize her potential. A very special woman. Now, something over here, this little corner we have here are the personal effects of the family. Of course, Michael, who's the son who died, he played a very important role in their lives until the very end. But over here, we see some of the private accessories that they had, that Chaim had. Chaim was a chain smoker. So we have his cigars, cigarette case, and so on. But we have something that's really, really unique. We have his passport. And can you read the number on the passport? Can you read that number? 00001. Then the question arises, who received number 2? And I had a lot of people that say, oh, it's probably Ben Gurion. Well, those people who think it was Ben Gurion are actually chauvinists. Number 2 was Vera. Number 3 was Ben Gurion. And I like to say that Vera and Ben Gurion didn't really get along. That wasn't the reason, but I'm sure it also didn't help any. Now, what we have here, as I said, all these personal effects. They found a letter from the last letter that his son wrote before the plane was shut down. They actually found that also in Chaim Weizmann's wallet. We're going to leave this room now, and we're going to go into the salon or the living room. So please follow me. Like I said before, I could live in this house today. It's really very warm and how should I say, comfortable to live in. Now, we are now in the living room. The living room is actually a mirror of the room of the library on the other side. And as you can see here, we actually have 2 living rooms. We have one that you're seeing now, and slowly as she turns around, you're going to see there's one on the right-hand side as well, or on your left. The question arises, why do they have 2? Well, the architect said to Vera, as an architect, I not only designed the building, but I designed everything that goes into it, including the smallest items such as teaspoons. And Vera, as I pointed out, was a very quiet woman. And she said, basically, time out, sweetheart. I'm going to live in the house. I decide what goes in. Now, they were Jewish. What did they do? They negotiated. And as a result, you have 2 living rooms. You have the one that Vera likes, which you can see over here. It's basically overstuffed British furniture. And then you have the one on this side that reminds you somewhat of a Bedouin tent of pillows. If you look carefully, you can see that it looks very Bedouin. Vera, by the way, she chose the materials because what happened was that the architect believed that Israel was on the crossroads, the historic crossroads of 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. So over here we have the England, or the United Kingdom, which would be Europe. Over here, you would have the Middle East. Then going towards the end over there on the wall, if you look at all the artifacts, or as my mother would call them, the little schmunzes, the tchotchkes, you look at them, you'll see they're from the Far East. So this would actually fit how he believed the house should be seen. Everything that you see in here was either purchased by auction or as gifts, and Vera was responsible. Although this house is called Vera and Chaim Weizmann's house, if you had asked Chaim Weizmann any question, he would say, speak to Vera, she's the one that makes the decisions. Now over here we have a gift that we received. I don't know if you recognize this man. Do you recognize him? Take a good look. Now, although I'm from the United States and I was raised and educated there, I couldn't figure out who this was until I read it. This is a bust of George Washington. I don't know about you, but when I grew up in school, the only time I saw George, he was always wearing a jacket up to his neck here. I never saw him without anything showing who he really was. This was a gift from the Jewish people to the first president of the Jewish people in Washington, from the American Jewish Committee, to the first president of the state of Israel. A gift of the first president of the United States to the first president of Israel. Now, if you look over here, we have these French doors, and outside the French doors, we have a swimming pool. It was not just for decoration, it was actually used, but the architect had made a mistake. He believed that when you open these doors in the evening, the cool air would come in from the Mediterranean, it would flow over the pool, and as it comes in, it would cool off the rooms. But he had two mistakes. One, in the summer, we have humidity of about 95%, and two, we have mosquitoes. But don't feel sorry for Chaim and Vera. They were quite wealthy, and what they brought in from the United Kingdom was what you see here. This is an air cooler, state of the art. The only problem was it has the engine of a B-52 bomber. So they had a choice of having cool air with mosquitoes and humidity, or having deafening cool air. Problems of the rich, something that I never personally suffered from. So what you see here is their living room. Here you see the piano. Here's where they would receive their guests internationally. Toscanini was a good friend of the family. He might have even played on this piano. Also, Marc Chagall was a good friend. He came to visit. Wingate, the General Wingate from the United Kingdom, he would come here. And of course, all the ambassadors and leaders of the world would come here as well. The house was commensurate to a president. And in 1948, 1950, there weren't that many buildings that could represent a state without looking third world, right? So this house actually was a godsend for the state of Israel, because when the ambassadors came, they didn't see us as a third world country. They saw a house that was commensurate to that of a president. Now, come, we're going to go up the staircase. I'm going to take you to his bedroom. I want to tell a short story about Chaim there. As we walk there, you can see some of the artifacts, some of the Judaica that he received as gifts as well. If you look at the staircase as we go up, it actually is like a piece of sculpture. Okay, here we go. Please hold on. Don't fall down. Now, although the house didn't have air conditioning, it was state of the art. It had under the floor heating, and actually, as you see here, you have vents where they had heating upstairs above as well. We're now going into Chaim Weizmann's bedroom. Okay, come on in. Here was Chaim's bed. Now, Chaim and Vera, they were aristocrats. They had separate bedrooms. I don't know how it was with you, but you can see from my age, when I grew up in the 1950s, Mom and Dad had beds. In between the beds, there was a table lamp with the lamp in the middle, and that's how they slept. But when you were very wealthy and you were aristocrats, you didn't have separate beds, you had separate bedrooms. This is where Chaim slept. This is his bed, that's his top hat. And if you look carefully over here above his bed are not pictures of his children, but a painting that shows the laying of the cornerstone of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Because as I said, this was his true passion. So what better way of actually showing his passion is that even above his bed, he shows education. As you see here, this is his bedroom. Now, Chaim Weizmann, although he learned in Cheder, he and Vera were not religious. They were not Orthodox, they were not religious. But, you know, we never know as parents how much to begin, but we ever teach our children what we inculcate them, what do they learn? Now, although he and Vera were not religious, when he was on his deathbed, and he died here in this house, when he realized his time was ending, he actually asked that someone bring him his machzor for Yom Kippur. This is the machzor. And he asked that someone read to him the prayer, to read him a prayer, and I'm now having a senior moment. Nesana Tokef. Anyway, they asked him to read the Nesana Tokef, which is man's relationship to God and God's relationship to man. And this was read to him while he was on his deathbed. Now, his son, Benjamin, had come from the United Kingdom because he knew that his father was in his final days. And what happened was, when Chaim died, he was actually laid to rest downstairs. And the Israelis would come here from the farms and from the cities and so on to pay homage. And over here, as you can see this window, the bay window, when the curtains would open, his son looked out the window and he said something that's very true, but something that is on one hand is very touching, but also very, very sad. When a person is a visionary, someone pays the price. We all know about Herzl that, as I said before, he used up his wife's dowry because he had no money of his own. He had a child that committed suicide and another child that converted to Christianity twice, right? Somebody pays the price when you have a visionary. And what happened here is we're talking about Chaim Weizmann and Benjamin. When Benjamin looked out this window and he saw all the Israelis coming to pay homage, he said something very unique. He said, now I know who my father's children are. Shows somebody pays a price, right? So here is where Chaim slept. Next to the room next door is actually, he has a room maybe for his manservant. Vera slept in the last room. I'll just show you very quickly. Her bedroom, you can see the difference. Chaim had a very simple bed. And here we're now coming into Vera's bedroom. In Vera, of course, she had the queen-size bed. You can call it the queen bee if you wish. And I was always surprised when I first came here to give a tour, why did they put a hot water bottle on her bed? Well, actually, think about it. Today, when a president or a prime minister goes overseas, they bring their wives with them and they travel. But in the days when they were married, Chaim was constantly traveling worldwide, whether it be as the president of the Jewish people or being a scientist going to conventions or meetings. Somebody stayed home. Vera, she stayed home alone. And I guess you can say the only way you can actually be comfortable in a beautiful house and in a large bed is with the water bottle. But it also symbolizes how lonely she must have been. Because when her husband was abroad, she had one son who was missing, dead, and she had another son with a grandson living in the United Kingdom. Okay, what we're going to do now, we're going to go downstairs. We have better Wi-Fi there. And you can ask questions. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Feel free to ask. If I don't know the answer, I'll say it was a very good question. And if I do know the answer, I'll still say it was a very good question.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's been, can you hear me?
I hear you. I hear every word.
Okay, wonderful. So
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible, fascinating tour so far. I do have a couple of questions. Let me just get to my notepad where I was writing the questions. Okay. So did the architect, Eric, design any other buildings in Israel that we know of?
Yes, Eric. Yes. In the Weizmann Institute, he actually designed another building. It's the Wolf Building. It looks like the upside, like a boat that was turned upside down. Now, the Weizmann Institute played a very important role during World War II, when in the Far East, soldiers suffered from malaria, and when the Japanese overcame the Western forces, all these plantations were lost to the British government. And what they did is they used the facilities here in Weizmann Institute to create synthetic quinine. And that was one of the areas that they had built. In addition, in Jerusalem, there are other buildings that were put up also by the architect. He eventually went to the United States where he set up a number of buildings as well, and he became renowned. But in Germany, he actually designed a chain of department stores, and he was very renowned there as well. His work is pretty famous. Yes. Next.
Are the dishes on the dining room table Rosenthal china?
All right, I'm Jewish. The first thing I did when I got here was I turned over the plate. I had to see if the dishes were where they came from. And I'm not going to do it now, but if I turn over the plate, you'll see that they are Rosenthal china. But I want you to know when I did turn over the plate, all of a sudden I heard doo-doo, doo-doo. He goes, Joel, please put down the plate. But I do that when I go to friends' houses, and then I said they have Wedgwood. All right, but at any rate, yes, the dishes are Rosenthal.
Great. We have a couple of people asking if we're going to see the kitchen facilities.
You want to see the kitchen? I can do that quick. Sure. I didn't know if you wanted to see it. I have great stories there. Come, I'll show you. Okay, follow me. We're going into the kitchen. Now, the kitchen was state of the art. State of the art in Germany was efficiency. So you have a section where you have the pantry, you have a section for washing up the dishes, and you have another section for cooking. All right? Now, when I came here, I saw this. Recognize the refrigerator? I fell in love with it. I couldn't believe it. When I turned 13, I went to visit my grandmom to invite her to the bar mitzvah, and she had this refrigerator in her living room. She had this refrigerator in her living room, and I didn't know what it was. And I said, Grandma, what is it? And she said, it's a refrigerator, but she says it doesn't work. So I said, well, what do you use? She says, I have a refrigerator in the kitchen. So I said, what are you doing with this? What are you putting in the living room for? She says, I'm not going to throw it out. Do you know what it cost me? So here we had the refrigerator. Now, if I was smart, I should have taken it with me. Today, it's considered a treasure. Now, here you have the engine. Now, if you think about it, in 1937, who had refrigerators in Israel if they had a refrigerator? Maybe the pharmacies had, maybe in some of the hospitals, but no one had refrigerators. So here we have the refrigerator. And in fact, we have a lot of children who come here. When they come, they all ask the same question. Mazeh, what's this? What's this? They think it's some other world. Come on, I'll show you over here something else that's interesting. Over here, we have something very British. We have their picnic basket. And if you look carefully, you'll see there's almost nothing missing. Now, most people wouldn't think much twice about it, but why is nothing missing? When can you go with a picnic basket in this country? In the winter, it's freezing cold. You have mud, you have bots, as we call it in Hebrew, and you have rain. And in the summer, we have the high humidity and you have the mosquitoes. So this is actually the way they probably brought it into the United Kingdom, from the United Kingdom. Over here, I want to show you one of the few real, true presidential items. Do you know what this is? This is an orange squeezer. And if you notice, it has the emblem of the state of Israel. In other words, what you're looking at here is the official orange squeezer for the president of the state of Israel. Now, do you think that Chaim Weizmann squeezed his own oranges? I highly doubt that. Now, if we go into the kitchen, as I said, the kitchen was state of the art. And the first oven that they had, if you look carefully, you'll see Wedgwood, right? And it's in perfect condition, right? So originally they had the gas burner, but as the time moved on, and again, Vera continued living here until the 1960s, you can see she actually had 2 electric ovens. No one had electric ovens in this country, and no one even had gas burners. They had what you call petilios. They had these little things made of kerosene, which you would put on the table and cook with it. And this is the kitchen that she had. It had state-of-the-art at the time. If you'll notice, there's only one sink because Chaim Weizmann and Vera, as I said, were not religious. It was not a question of space. They just had no need for 2 sinks. All right? Now, another cute story. If you look over here, you see this the little bowl with papers in it? Do you know what they're for? These papers are what you put on the legs on the chicken, on the pulka. Now, when I went to South Africa as a Shaliach Aliyah, I had to do a course on manners. Basically because I guess they figured if you come from New York, you don't know how to eat. So I had to go to a course on manners, and the woman who taught me was Mrs. Neergoth, close to God, Neergoth. Her father was the first ambassador to Vienna, to Austria, and she taught us manners. And one of the things she asked us was, when can you eat chicken with your fingers? And there were those who said, well, if you had these little papers and you put it on there, you can hold it like that. Someone said, if you had a barbecue, then at barbecues, you can eat chicken with your fingers. And I never forget that she said to me, never. The answer is you can never eat chicken with your fingers. Why? Because if you can't get it off with a knife and a fork, then the Lord did not want you. And when I saw this, it reminded me of that story. It was a cute curio. So here we have the kitchen. Over there, as I showed you, here we have the pantry. It was all state-of-the-art at the time. Maybe not that impressive today because they didn't have the microwaves and they didn't have computers, but at the time it was truly efficient and really very special. In fact, the kitchen was bigger than most houses that people own, with the bedrooms and everything else that goes with it. Next question. Hello?
I have some debate about, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. What was the question?
Okay, great. So we have some debate going on about the 6 languages that were spoken. So some of the languages are English, Russian, German, Hebrew, and Yiddish, but trying to figure out the sixth language, French. Okay. So that
his wife, now Chaim Weizmann, he came from a shtetl, he came from a village, right? He might have been upper middle class, but he came from his village. Vera, on the other hand, she came from the city. She learned ballet. She danced ballet, right? She was more cultured and refined. So you can always say that there was always a problem here too. He could be the so-called country bumpkin, which he was not, but she actually was refined in culture. She learned French, she spoke French, and so on. So that's something I like to point out. Also, when it comes to Chaim Weizmann and Ben Gurion, when it came to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, they worked like this. But as friends, they were never friends, right? Chaim was the aristocrat, and Ben Gurion was basically the farmer, all right? But when it came to the state of Israel, and I like to stress that there would not be a state of Israel without Chaim Weizmann, and there would not be a state of Israel with just Ben Gurion. You needed both. They worked together. One worked internationally, one worked within the country itself. Chaim Weizmann was not a politician. Ben Gurion knew to work through political parties to build power and so on, and to get things done. Together, they built the nation. So you can say you can call one the father of the nation, you can call the other one the father of the nation. But I guess we're unique. In my own personal opinion, we actually have two fathers of the nation. Great. Next question.
What kind of doctor was Vera?
Who? Vera? Vera was a pediatrician. That's why when she went to the United Kingdom and she saw that she created that tipat chalav, or that drop of milk to take care of the children, because the children did not have medical care at that time. There were no unions to take care of them. She was a pediatrician, and we're talking about 140 years ago. A woman going to university, Mele, a woman becoming a doctor, that's something very, very special. She was a very unique woman, very special. And as I said, very hard life. I actually fell in love with the idea of the woman after I learned so much about her, reading about her. She was very special.
Great. What was Weizmann's role at Hebrew U after it opened?
Of Chaim Weizmann's role in Hebrew University after it opened?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I would advise you to really go to Google. You can write Hebrew University or the autobiography of Chaim Weizmann. It's complicated because politics are involved and power struggles and so on. And I really don't think this is the time to go into it. Besides, my wife, I still have to go home and I haven't done the dishes yet.
No problem. How is the acreage of the Weizmann estate used today? Is there part of the estate working as a research facility?
Okay, the land, the 40 dunam of land is it's still part. It's now part. It all became part of the Weizmann Institute. The Weizmann Institute actually takes care, maintains it. Right? They also get a budget from the government, but they are totally responsible. For instance, 2 years ago, or maybe about 3 years ago, the building was once again renovated and restored because of constant deterioration from the elements. But the land all belongs to the Weizmann Institute. They have orchards here, and so on. But the land can be used for whatever the institute wishes to use it for. Like if they're going for 40 dunam, that's a lot of land just to keep as farmland. I guess as time progresses and they'll need more land to build additional facilities for the institute, it might be a possibility that they'll use it for that. But in the meantime, it's actually just open land and it's quite beautiful. One thing you'll see about the institute followed his vision. The institute, the lands are magnificent. They're beautifully manicured gardens and flowers and trees all over. Because Chaim Weizmann, he lived in the United Kingdom and he truly believed that if you want a scientist to be able to succeed, he has to have an environment that's commensurate to it. And he saw green as being soothing and dynamic that would help. So therefore, everything in this institute is very green and lush and very well kept. It's very important because the idea which was behind his original vision is still the idea behind the institute today. It's got to be an institute that is encouraging individuals to maximize their potential in research and so on.
Great. guess question is, the house looks pretty large from where we're sitting. So just trying to get an idea of how big exactly the house is. So how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms are in the house?
Okay, the house is, like I said, I could live here if it wasn't for all the windows. Just in the tower alone, they have 140. It's a very big house on any standard. Upstairs on the second floor, there's 5 bedrooms. There are 5 bedrooms on the second floor and 2 bathrooms. And on the top floor, there's another bedroom that could have been used for an au pair, although they didn't have an au pair. It's a very small bedroom. On the first floor, you have 3 main rooms. They have as I showed you those rooms, and a huge open space that could be used to receive guests, cocktails, and so on. And of course, the kitchen. I think there are 1 or 2 extra bathrooms down here as well that are not in use, but they do exist on this floor and so on. The main room, which we now use to show a 10-minute film on Weizmann and Vera, that was actually the place where those farmers, when they came here, were actually able to sleep during the night, right? And they had the showers and so on here as well. The house is really very large and very beautiful. I wish I could show you from the outside. It is magnificent.
Yeah, that's what people were asking, what it looks like from the outside. So I do want to reiterate to people that this house is open for visitors when you come to Israel, and you can do tours when you come to Israel and go visit the house. So it is open for visitors.
Definitely.
Great.
And since we only have an hour, I only told you 10% of the stories that I have behind me. And I'm not the only tour guide. All right. So every tour guide has his own unique way of expressing himself and his knowledge of what he knows of the house. The house is beautiful and very, very special. Very,
Sure.
very special. But so is Chaim and Vera. They were very, very special.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And
Good.
for everybody on the call, we encourage you to go to Israel and get the other 90% of the Weizmann house in person and with a tour guide, with Joel or another tour guide. But for now, we thank you for being here with us and for taking us through the house and everything that you do in Israel. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week, Joel. Thank you for taking us through the house. Thank you all for being here.
My pleasure.
We will not have a tour next week because of the winter break, but we will be back on January 4th. Thank you all so much from United States, from Canada, from Israel. Thank you so much for being here with us as we take one last look at the house and the pictures. Thank you for all your wonderful comments from Toronto, from everywhere. Thank you. Hi, Dad. I have to say hi to my dad. Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year. We will not see you before the New Year. So Happy New Year to everybody. Hi from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I can't say your state for some reason. Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody. If you didn't catch the beginning of the recording, you can go to our YouTube channel, Baltimore Zionist District. It's already on there, and you can view the whole presentation starting now. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Have a wonderful and happy New Year.